you've spoken of regeneration as both a personal and a planetary journey. What do you think this word, regeneration, means to you on a more human level?
It's interesting because I spent the last 2 years traveling to Europe, to blue zones. And I've been looking at the lives of centenarians, doing a lot of filming, documentary kind of work. And the takeaways are, what does it mean to live a life regenerative? Means that we must nourish, we must connect, and we must move. Those are the three tenets of health span and lifespan.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better, the podcast where we explore paths to regeneration of the planet, of our systems, and of ourselves. Today's guest is a pioneer in herbal medicine and a true champion of the regenerative movement, Ric Scalzo. Before we get started with Ric, I have got to share a tree planting update. Through our partnership with forestplanet.org, we plan to plant over 20,000 trees this year. And as of April 24th, 2025, when we're recording this episode, we've planted over 8,300 trees, which means we are well on our way. You can help us scream past that 20,000 objective. You see, we're planting a tree for every new subscriber, whether on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or to our newsletter on caremorebebetter.com. Yes, that means we will plant more than one tree for each of you. So open up those apps, smash those buttons, and follow along to help us create a greener world. Now, you may know Ric Scalzo as the founder of Gaia Herbs, a brand synonymous with integrity and herbal potency. After selling Gaia in 2019, Ric turned his attention to deeper regenerative practices, founding the Institute of Botanical Research and establishing CR Medicinal Farms in Costa Rica. Now he's leading Kokora Life, a new venture that weaves his 4 decades of herbal medicine experience with the wisdom of regenerative agriculture. In this episode, we'll explore the intersection of ancient herbal traditions and cutting-edge soil science, discuss the potency of plants grown regeneratively, and discover why Ric believes the future of medicine begins with the microbiome of the soil and of ourselves. This will be a regenerative conversation. With that, Ric, welcome to the show.
Great, thank you. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Corinna.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just thrilled to learn more about you. I've listened to you guest on a few podcasts, including Jeffrey Burke and his show. I believe he's a collaborator of yours at Kokora. So I wonder if you could start by telling us what originally drew you to the healing power of plants and just a bit of your origin story.
That's an interesting question to start off with because when I got involved with plants, it was in my college years, I was looking for some answers to the origin of the universe and who was God. And I was majoring in philosophy in college, and I wasn't getting clarity or the answers that I was hoping to get. So I went out and meditated out in nature one night and asked for some answers. And the only thing I could come up with that if I wanted to get closer to the origin of the universe, I needed to study plants. And so I dropped everything. I kind of did a 180 and went to herb school, went to naturopathic school and began my journey. This was long ago. And that led me into a lot of different avenues of plant medicine, diagnosis, treatment. I worked as a medical herbalist in a medical office and saw over 10,000 patients. And, the whole experience has led up to this moment. And this moment is about, as you alluded to, is about, for me, how to live a life regenerated. And what does that look like? And you mentioned, Corinna, something really beautiful about the soil food web as a very important part of regenerative life. And that's been a big focus for the last few years of understanding where it all begins.
You and I have both been in this industry a long time. I also got my start and on the herbal side of things back in 1999, working for Draco Natural Products and working with brands to create formulas that harness the full potential of herbs that were full spectrum and then standardized to a key marker, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had this sense even then, as I was getting to know supplements in this field, having come from the perspective of an undergraduate study in anthropology, wanting to know more about people, wanting to explore and understand what motivated us. And one of the things that drew me to working with nutrition over just going to become Ms. Archaeologist was the fact that I felt I could have more impact today by learning
Yeah.
more about how this nutrition could impact the lives of people when we already saw so much of the nutrient profile of what people eat in a day is really dramatically reduced, not just because the foods are mass produced, but because they're not even eating a wide variety of foods anymore. There's, I think, research that says most people consume only 10 plants a week. That's their variety, their bread basket, or that's the bounty. The lettuce, cucumbers, celery, carrots, and maybe a few other things, right? And so the bounty available to us has become something that we're just, generally speaking, as Americans, less familiar with than we should be. And I feel like what you're doing and what you have done with your history with Gaia and also with Kokora now is that you're encouraging us to stay integrated with these roots. And I wondered if you could talk about that, this journey that has consistently merged what that traditional wisdom is with modern science, and what lessons that you might have integrated from Gaia that are informing what you're doing with Kokora.
Yeah, the whole thing about making good herbal medicine, which has really been my journey, how to really bring the very finest herbal products to the world. That whole journey it all begins with growing good herbs. Really, knowing the plants from which these medicines come from, and that there's a whole lot packed into that. In terms of supply, in terms of cultivation, in terms of seed selection, and being sure that you're selecting the right variant or cultivar. So I spent a lot of time at Gaia when I was there, really looking at cultivars and which are the more authentic cultivars that go back into traditional use, and being sure that what we're claiming is indeed the correct genus and species that is used traditionally. I spent a lot, and I've really, I'm proud to say, made some impacts on certain crops, ashwagandha being one of them. Holy basil, Corinna, was a big one. How we looked at over 10 cultivars that had been used in the industry as claimed to be holy basil, but not really the original cultivar used traditionally in medicine. So we cleared that up, and I brought that cultivar to Costa Rica. But that's been a big point for me, is really bridging this knowledge for the consumer, for the retailer, because they don't think about these things, about what goes into making a quality medicine. Do I really have the right genus and species, and am I really extracting it properly?
I've got to say, I think it was back in about 2010 or 2009, you went through a bit of a rebrand at Gaia, and you had this transparency QR code or something to that effect on the box where people could trace the origin of every herb, right?
Yeah. And we're doing this with Kokora now. It probably will be more of a story we tell with Kokora, since we control a lot of the raw materials that we grow in Costa Rica. But you see, I guess my point, to answer your earlier question, is there are so many components. If you are really going to adopt the traditional use of medicine and how that converges with today's research and science on herbal medicine, and all the different components that are involved in bringing good quality herbal products to the market, it's vast. And I would hope your consumers get an appreciation for what goes into making a quality herbal product. It's not just about the fancy packaging or or the convenience of being a gummy, because it tastes sweet and it tastes good, but what goes on in making a quality herbal product is pretty vast in my world.
Yeah, and I think you could speak to that broadly. What goes on behind the scenes to make a quality supplement of any stripe is complicated. I mean, frankly, especially if it is an organoleptic. Now, full disclosure, your team, they sent me a kit which included a variety of your first products with Kokora. And so I have been sampling them. And this one is a mushroom mocha, which I can proudly share with people. I tried your golden milk this morning. You've chosen not to sweeten these at all, so people can sweeten to their palate.
Yeah.
And traditionally, a lot in the golden milk space, they might include things like coconut sugars or honey crystals or sugar of some sort in a golden milk. So they don't really give you that option, right? I like to use local honey. The reason I like to use local honey is I suffer from seasonal allergies, and I like to support local businesses. But what I have found is a major controller for any seasonal allergies I suffer from is if I get honey from a local apiary who's like literally in my neck of the woods, I don't get, itchy, sneezy, issues. I don't have my eyes swell up and, just God, my corners of my eyes, they just itch and hurt and all that. All of that goes away. The throat issue, basically, if I just routinely consume a local honey, everything's good. So your product allows me to do that. But what I'll also say is having this history of formulating with herbs, I know some of them don't always taste very good. Right. So, you've done a pretty good job of making that, very, very palatable. And this product in particular, cacao, I'll always do cacao. I eat raw cacao nibs, I'll put it on my yogurt. It's delicious, right? Coconut milk, turkey tail, which is Trametes versicolor, the correct, one. Mucuna seed, reishi fruit body extract, lion's mane, shiitake, maitake, chaga, cordyceps, ginger root, and monk fruit. Now, the monk fruit does sweeten it a bit, but it's not there in the flavor too much, which is good.
No.
Sometimes that's too much, you only put 40 milligrams in.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how you're able to formulate these to make them palatable, enjoyable, and what something like this could do for my health, because you're giving so many extracts of fruiting bodies of mushrooms. And I think people don't necessarily understand everything of why mushrooms are so helpful.
Yeah, well, mushrooms, are a unique, contribution to the health and wellness space, very unique because they connect us to 50 million years of evolution that has taken place in our soil, from the very first hyphae and mycelia masses that were created by the leafcutter ants of all creatures in our soil. They were the first regenerative farmers, by the way, Corinna, the leafcutter ants.
Yeah, and they milk an aphid, don't they?
Well, they actually do create an excrement that becomes enables the generation or production of single-stranded hyphae, which is what the workers in the nest kind of feed off of, and it creates a fungal kind of growth around it. So that single-strand hyphae is indeed the first, aspect of regenerating soil. And, so when you talk about mushrooms, they connect us to a long history of what really breeds life and regenerates life. And I believe that's in the soil. And so this whole soil food web, which mushrooms tap into so beautifully, and are an expression of soil that's rich in the food web. I'm talking about beneficial fungi, bacteria, nematodes, arthropods, macroarthropods, protozoa. This is the soil food web that makes the magic in our food and makes the magic in our medicine happen. It brings nutrients to the roots. It enables the environment of the soil to be compatible for the plant to grow in. And it increases nutrient density. When I think...
Can we stop there for a second? I really want to talk about that nutrient density piece, and I'm afraid that otherwise we might meander into a path that takes us away from it.
Yeah.
There's so much to learn specifically about how soil affects nutrition. And I think two things. First, if people want to envision what the mycelia of mushrooms are like in soil, they're almost like capillaries that deliver nutrients from one thing to the other. I say almost because it's not exactly true, but it provides a mechanism through which plants can communicate. And so what we know is that when you have a healthy microbial presence in the soil, that trees in a forest can sacrifice some of their sugars to other trees to help them survive if they get hit by fungus or let's say another type of fungus that destroys the tree, or a pest that comes and hits their bark or their leaves or something to that effect. Like there's all sorts of ways in which these trees can communicate also through this mycelial network. But we also are starting to be able to document that healthier soil produces plants with a better nutrition profile. And this would make sense, but conventional farmers have said it isn't true forever. Yet we know that before 1970, spinach had more iron in it than it does today. So what are you seeing in the science where you're growing?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. We grew on our farm in Costa Rica, turmeric grew organically for 2 or 3 years before we converted to regenerative. And our yields were about 2.5% to 3% total curcuminoids. And after 1 year of switching over to regenerative organic agriculture, meaning that we attended to the soil food web and building that up and a number of other factors, the total curcuminoids in 1 year went from 2.5/3% to about 8.5%, almost a 3.5 to 4-fold increase.
Wow.
That's very, very significant. Also, for those farmers who would say, oh, I can't afford to do this. Well, I would argue in my case, our biomass yield from that same hectare, that's about two acres, a little over, but from the same area, in exactly the same area that we grew previously, we got 15,000 kilos per hectare. Growing regeneratively, we got 80,000 kilos per hectare.
Wow. Turmeric it looks a lot like a ginger, right? So for those that aren't familiar with turmeric root, you can see it at some grocery stores now. Sometimes they'll have it in the bin right next to the ginger, but it's more orange. So it's essentially the rhizome of the turmeric plant, right?
Yeah, it is. We use the rhizome, the little fingers, but I say that to really respond to your question about nutrient density. You know, in this case, I think nutrient and phytochemical density is synonymous. You know, in terms of turmeric, I'm talking about the phytochemical density, but the nutrient density is much higher as well. This makes a whole lot of sense. If you're growing food with more nutrients in it, you're going to be healthier. If you're growing medicine with more phytochemicals in it and you extract it properly, you're going to get more benefit. And, you know, the important thing is that's the unseen factor, Corinna. And you did allude to it, and I wanted to pick it up because what you were saying earlier is relevant, that there is wisdom in nature. Nature has intelligence. And this is what enabled these two trees to kind of connect in an unseen, you know, non-communicative way. There is wisdom and intelligence at play. And I would say that when our plants grown in regenerative soils are being exposed to a higher value of microbiology, that is implanted, you know, energetically. That microbiome of the soil is implanted into the plants that we are going to make as medicine. And thus, anything that's grown in a microbiome-rich soil is going to have the blueprint of that for our own gut when we ingest it. So it is going to benefit, you know, in a way that connects us to nature so beautifully.
Yeah. Well, I think the story is deep. It makes sense. I like that we're getting to a space where the science is following logic. It's like, oh, of course, if you put more nutrients in the soil, more minerals and everything else, the plant grows better. It's going to be healthier. It will also have a better nutrient profile. And, you know, farmers who grow in vertical farms indoors and can control every input, they notice the same thing. So it's like, why wouldn't it be the same when we bring it into the soil and grow plants in their natural environment? Why would it be different?
The work done at the Rodale Institute, who's a big advocate of regenerative farming, the work that they've done on an amino acid called ergothioneine in growing legumes has shown that growing legumes in regenerative soil with a higher soil food web produces more ergothioneine in the bean, in the legume. And this is an amino acid that's essential for our longevity, but we don't get it in our foods anymore because our soils are so depleted.
Again, it's proving out, right? So I wanted to speak with you for a moment about something I'm actually doing some research on, and that has to do with consumer perception, even the perception of industry professionals like yourself, myself, and then certifying bodies. This is the story of regenerative versus organic. Kokora Life emphasizes regenerative organic agriculture. So I would like for you to define for our audience, from your perspective, how you define the difference between organic and regenerative organic, and then just regenerative on its own.
So in terms of growing regenerative versus organic, I grew at Gaia, we grew organic for the time I was there, 25 years. However, my organic program was crop rotation, it was cover cropping, it was composting, a little organic fertilizer. And over the years, I was able to really replenish the soil. But what I never was able to do was move the needle. Every year when I would test for the nutrients in the soil, I would think, I'm doing all this to the soil. Next year, my soil is going to be more nutritious. And it wasn't. It was always the same year after year. And, I didn't know until I started to reflect on this, going to regenerative farming, I now understand why I wasn't moving the needle. And because
Can I
wasn't,
guess?
huh? Yeah.
Can I guess?
Well, what would you think?
I would think it was tilling.
Tilling is a big part of it because for your listeners, tilling is exposing the microbiome, the soil food web, to the sun. And, all of this release in that takes place in the atmosphere is just you're losing all of the essential nutrients that sustains the soil food web. So you lose it. But when I started to grow regeneratively, the very first thing we did, which differentiated a big part, aside from tilling is an important part of it. In regenerative farming, we don't till. We make beds, and so we work on the top few inches, but we don't plow our soils. And but the biggest thing I did was develop my biofermentation facility. I built a biofermentation facility, and what we did is we call this MEME in Costa Rica, and it stands for mountain microorganisms. And we went to the forest around the farm, and we gathered some of the top half inch, 3/4 of an inch in the understory in the forest, brought it back to the bioferment lab, and we mixed it with molasses, with rice semolina, with coffee hulls, with cinnamon, with cloves, and there's a few other ingredients I know that are in there. And we took all of that, mixed it all up, put it in a large 55-gallon sack, tied it up, put the sack in a 200-gallon tank of water, and let it ferment for 2 weeks. And we have made our entire farm is now treated with this fermentation process. And we've made our own nutrients with this ferment. We've made potassium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, whatever we need, calcium for the soils. And we've made our own pathogen control remedies, our own trichoderma, streptomyces, that's used if we see any pathogens on the plant. So we're fully nourishing our farm with what was originally the wisdom that was originally in the forest floor that has fermented and created its own biome. And how we get it deep into the soil, Corinna, is we use an implement called the yeoman's plow, and it's a 24-inch shank that's only 1 inch wide. And it's not a plow. It doesn't turn over the soil. It just creates a 1 inch width space, 24 inches deep, and we inject this mountain microorganism solution into the soil. And then there's an explosion of life that takes place. And it's amazing what we see year over year. Our soils are just transformed.
I feel like I need to see this fermentation process. At first, I was thinking something more like what you do with vermicomposting, and making black teas or something like that from it.
That's a whole separate function of our farm. We do our own vermicompost and vermicompost tea with worm castings, but bioferments and making your own microbiome solutions is a big part of our regenerative practice that differentiates from organic to regenerative. You mentioned tilling. We don't do tilling. We did do that in organic agriculture. And then we do something now that I haven't done is intercropping, meaning that if I'm growing ginger, I'm going to grow a nitrogen fixing crop within the same bed as the ginger. So that's important as well. Yeah, and the results on soil transformation are tremendous. The amount of earthworms we see on our farm, and every spring when the rains come, every April/May, the amount of what I call mushroom bloom. If you want kind of a good characteristic of whether your soil is alive, see if it's producing mushrooms. And every spring in April, you can see 100 acres of mushroom bloom in my soils. And I smile and I say, wow, nature is really doing it.
Yeah, so the only reason I don't like seeing mushrooms in my yard is because some of them are toxic to dogs, and my dogs don't always know what's best, But I just pick the fruiting bodies when that happens and, keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough to identify which ones are the hazardous ones. So
there are mushrooms that actually specifically emerge out of mycelia that are fixers of microbiology activity in the soil, and that's typically what we see.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
And a day later, they're gone.
A day later, wow. Now, one person who helped me think about things like weeds differently was Paul Hawken. I've interviewed him a couple of times on this show, first about regeneration, ending the climate crisis in one generation, and more recently about his book, Carbon, the Book of Life. Yeah. And it feels very much like your philosophy and his are entwined. His perspective is really that we just need to create more life on Earth. He helped me to understand that weeds are there for a reason, and often it is to fix the soil, much as you've just shared the mushrooms are doing that repair work. I wonder if there's other wisdom that you feel you've learned that is perhaps a bit unconventional, and maybe what you haven't just already shared.
Regarding weeds, weeds are the first succession of life. So when your soils are ready to plant, the first thing that comes up are weeds. And so that's what I mean about the first succession. However, the reason why many farmers confront weed overgrowth is because the form of nitrogen is not the correct form of nitrogen. You really need ammonium nitrate in order to for the real beneficial type of weeds and weed control system to be managed properly. And the way to do that is change the soil food web. I really, I used to say it's not enough to be carbon neutral anymore. And it's not enough to think of, we can sequester carbon. The idea of drawdown now is so relevant that we have to actively practice lifestyles that draw down our carbon. And one of the most significant way we can do that is just what Paul said, is keep the earth green. And, and that's a big tenet of regenerative agriculture is, never leave your soil exposed.
Yeah, well, it's changed how I deal with weeds in my yard too. So
And you can, it's okay to have weeds, but you can get to a point where you have the right weeds,
mhm.
you know.
Well, dandelions or something. I'm glad they're there, right? Like, oh, it's nice to see you. My favorite dandelion friends. I use their greens. I feed them to our guinea pigs. And, there are spaces that I think people need to remember that this is actually a medicinal plant too. Everything's useful in a dandelion, from its flowering head to the roots. It's really an incredible herb. So we've talked a bit about regenerative versus organic. There are some in the space, like Gabe Brown, for example, who's a bastion of hope for the regenerative agricultural field and really working to get more conventional farmers over to work in a regenerative capacity, to reduce their chemical inputs and to move forward by not tilling and allowing fields to rest when they're needed, and doing things like interspersing different plants and having grazers come on the land, and all of these things that are common sense and which we used to do but got away from as we monocrop, and shove all this oil-based soil amendments to grow more crops. Really, we've been doing it in a broken capacity. So he's working really hard to get these farmers who have farmed in a more conventional way back to traditional methods and regenerative agriculture. His certification, Regenified, does not require that you be first organic certified. I wonder what your thoughts are about that, and overall, how you see the movement progressing at the present time.
I am a big fan, and there are many reasons why I feel having the start of an organic cert, program is important. I have many farmers that are part of a co-op we're creating who are wanting to grow for us, and I would love them to be regenerative certified. But the steps to be regenerative certified with our agency, which is Regenerative Organic Alliance, is you first get organic certified, then you get fair trade or some trade organization. We use fair trade. You could be Fair Wild or some other one. Get that certification, then you can apply for the ROC certification, the Regenerative Organic certification. I like that because there's layers of accountability there, and layers of responsibility that might not otherwise be there if you were to just say, all right, I'm going to go and use this agency to become regenerative certified. And I think the industry of regenerative farming is so new. We need to follow the proper guidance, and accountability is so important right now. Not just accountability, but we also need to draw back on documentation, and having a history of organic farming and leading up to regenerative gives us a lot of data points that we can say, oh, this is working, and it's not, and so forth.
Okay. Yeah. And it all makes a lot of sense to me, but I also hear his perspective, which is really we need more farmers to move to regenerative practices as quickly as possible so that we can essentially stop degrading our soils, bring the life back home, so to speak. Carbon, if we look at carbon as life, because we're all carbon-based beings, so is all life on Earth, bring carbon back into the soil without continuing to degrade our topsoil, and making that priority one, and then creating a path where some of these conventional farmers who are largely monocroppers can work towards something that is better with time. And I've heard criticism from, for example, the Bronner's brand. Leader over at Bronner's wrote kind of critical article about that perspective around Expo West 2024, so March 2024. And that was the time that the film Common Ground was coming out and debuting at Expo West. Now, I still, regardless of your perspective, I really recommend, if you have any interest at all in regenerative agriculture, I think that you should watch the films Common Ground and also the predecessor, Kiss the Ground, because it helps you get a primer, an understanding of really where we were, where we're going, and the potential of moving in this direction overall, for not only creating food systems that are healthier for us, but also of being part of the climate solution and a significant part of the climate solution. Those films are both available now on Amazon Prime. So if you pay for an Amazon membership, you can watch them for free. And Kiss the Ground, I think, is still available on Netflix as well. At any rate, I've interviewed people that have been involved in those films over the years, including Josh Tickle, who is the filmmaker and producer behind both. Also some other individuals I'm sure that you know too. I'm still waiting to interview Gabe Brown. I really want to hear from him from that farmer's perspective, help him bring that forward, working, with cattle ranching and beyond. What is your perspective on the integration of animals in some of these processes?
Yeah.
Because I hear from vegans a lot that they're still uncomfortable with this perspective, but I'd really like to just hear from you where you think animal integration.
We use manures. We don't have animals on our farm, but animals provide the nitrogen. You talk about carbon. Every farm needs the 4 building blocks of life: carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. And so, it's essential to have a good amount of nitrogen, in the right form of nitrogen, going into your soil. So I feel like, yes, if we had animals, it would be a little bit more work, because we specifically where we would have to take, for example, cattle, we would have to take the poop and transform it into healthy compost, because it wouldn't be functional for us just to have cattle roaming, dropping their poop all over the fields. And then we run the risk of having crops high in E. coli. So we've got to do something with it to break it down properly and transform it into compost. And for that reason, Corinna, we have built a very large, probably 30 or 40,000 square foot composting facility. In that facility, we use chicken manure and we use fish byproducts. And that really, those are fast-acting nitrogens, so they work to help break down all the carbon and so forth that we're putting in there.
Well, I think that's really critical to understand the basics. Like, we need these inputs. You have to figure out a way to include them, whether or not you have cattle coming through and grazing on your cover crop and then, leaving their poop behind or doing something else. There's also this big push to lay aside tracts of land to more wild perspective so that the land itself can rewild. How do you see your work coming close to that? I know that in Costa Rica, there are some agroforestry projects which are almost in line with that rewilding perspective. So I wondered if you had thoughts to share on that.
Yeah, I don't know the bigger story of Costa Rica, but just around my farm, it's so important to sustain the forest around the farm as an important part of the farm, because there you have all of the hundreds of thousands of years of wisdom that is retained in the forest floor, and that's so important to really recognize that what is going to take place on your farm can be, you can mirror what's in the forest floor right around your farm and kind of replicate it, because you've got all those life forms, all those fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes that are in the forest floor. That's what you now want in your fields. And so I think it's good to protect, preserve, and to somehow find a way of integrating the forest into your farming practices, like we do with the biofermentation facility. It's just, it makes it work.
Well, I think people have already got a taste for this perspective that you seem to come from, which has a lot to do with growing many of your ingredients yourself, if not all of them, right? With Gaia, you had an active farm on the property there. I know that your employees would take home baskets of vegetables and work the garden itself too. And now you're doing this in Costa Rica with CR Medicinal Farms. So I'd like for you to talk about why you made that choice and what it makes easier and perhaps what it also makes harder.
Well, we have partners in the U.S. that are regenerative agriculture, growing herbs, and they're growing temperate crops. But to grow tropical crops and to really, because a lot of the tropical crops that infiltrate into our industry are sourced from India, from Asia, Southeast Asia, and the controls on quality are not in place. And some of them come from Central America, some come from South America, but the quality control is not in place. And I know that some of them come from China. I've seen what the organic certification program is in China, and unfortunately, it's not up to my standard. So I took Costa Rica as a location to grow tropical plants. So I'm talking about turmeric root, ginger root, passion flower, holy basil, bacopa. Bacopa is a beautiful herb for cognitive function. Mucuna. Now we're growing moringa trees, and there's a good half dozen others. And ashwagandha is a big one for us. That could be grown temperately, but growing it in the tropics is a whole nother story. And so I wanted to bring some of these crops that are available in our industry, but not controlled properly at the supply. And I think we've done an amazing job doing it. And so when Kokora's capsules launched in May, the herbal singles and the herbal blends are 100% regenerative organic sourced from our farm.
So they will bear the certification, the rock certification on the front of the label.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Now, why Costa Rica? And I ask this because, we had Tom Newmark on this show as one example. He started farming ginger and such in Costa Rica long ago when he was leading the charge over at New Chapter. Continues to do projects there and continues to focus on regenerative growing conditions, really much along the same lines that you are. So I'm just curious to see why Costa Rica.
It's a friendly country, for one. I think the government is interesting, and I don't like to get involved in politics, but our farm, the process side of our farm is in what we were granted by the government as a duty-free zone, and that means tax-free zone to do the post-harvest processing, and that means the government gets involved. And so it was really interesting to see how interested this government is in regenerative farming. And we have been working to set up a model that the government can replicate with other growers in Costa Rica and some large ones, some very large ones. So I find it interesting how our influence can much more easily spread in a country like Costa Rica. We're about to do the same. I've been invited, pre-show I told you about El Salvador. We're about to do the same. We've been invited by the government of El Salvador to go and make presentations about regenerative agriculture conversion for the whole country in El Salvador. And I think we're off to a very good start in Costa Rica, and I love the fact that they are receptive to this.
Well, and to be frank, this needs to be a global effort. We need to work on these types of solutions, not just in our own backyards, but literally everywhere we're growing food, everywhere we're growing herbs, everywhere there's soil to be protected. So I'm very appreciative of that fact. I just wondered in some cases if it was just also because it's a nice place to live.
That wasn't my first reason, but
it is right?
a lovely place to live, and I love being here. But I will tell you, doing farming in Costa Rica the way we're doing it has attracted a lot of attention, and I'm proud of that.
Really fantastic. I hope that I one day get to come visit and see it in person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you speak on the social impact side of your work thus far? I realize that this is a fairly nascent brand. You're about a year old at this point, if I have that right.
Yeah, we launched our first products. The 7-mushroom mocha was one of our first products last October, so about 7 months. And we have really been involved in telling our regenerative story online, on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And, we've been doing it now for a year and a half, 2 years without a product line. So this was all about telling the story about how to build a regenerative life. What does it mean to live a life regenerated? And what are the regenerative principles of nature that we can adopt into our life, into our culture, into our business, into our leadership style? I've really worked hard on codifying those principles as I have learned them and I have observed them from nature. And so it's important that this is not just about the products that Ric is creating, which are beautiful products. It's also about the impact it's going to have on, the narrative we speak about a regenerative life and how we can share that narrative with others, and how, like you said, we've got to populate this, how we can populate it all over the world. But I think we have to, what I've been doing is building a narrative of what are these principles that nature has been governing with for eternity, and how do we adopt those principles into the leadership and culture of Kokora and into our narrative that we share on social media, and really, energize this concept of a life regenerated.
Now, are you integrating with that work a set of core principles or values that can be visible on your website, just as a for example?
Yeah, we are, and basically, I'll if you wish, I'll just say them quickly, and I won't elaborate on all of them. But the first principle, I'll say the Latin name first and then translate. The first principle is the vis medicatrix naturae, which is the principle in naturopathic medicine that translates to the healing power of nature. This embraces the thought that everywhere in nature, the construct is set up to guide us to wellness. This is how nature is set up, to guide us to wellness. And this is how business should be set up, to guide us to a healthier and more vital dynamic in our culture, business culture, and in our interpersonal relationships in business. The second principle of nature that nature always uses, first do no harm, is the translation. Primum non nocere translates to first do no harm. And, this is so important when you establish goals and objectives, that they have embedded in them the do good philosophy of really helping, to lift people's vitality up, and not at the expense of some other part of life. The third and fourth principles of nature, of regenerative wisdom in nature, are tolle causum and tolle totum. Stands for treat the cause and treat the whole person. And in practice, in leadership, in practice in business culture, we need to have this attitude that whenever we make sound business decisions, we take the whole organism in mind, and not just want to think that, if we launch this product, we're going to get a lot of money and we're going to be very, very successful. But what's the impact on the environment in doing so? And so we have to look in the totality of life, and nature does that all the time. The fifth principle is docere ac docere. And, this is so important to me because I view myself as a teacher, and the idea that as a CEO of a company, I should never show up as a boss. I should only show up as a teacher to all the people in the organization. And I should have a practice of imbibing as much of the wisdom that I have accumulated over my years in my observations of nature and so forth. I should share that wisdom with the next generation. So teacher as the leader, and it's such an important, foundation in which to guide, your life on. And then the sixth one and final one is preventare, which means practice prevention at all time. And every decision you adopt in your work, in your culture, you want to have the idea that you're adopting it for, the totality, the wholeness of the organism, and that we're essentially not disrupting, life in any choice we make. So those principles, I can really elaborate on them, but that's a quick summary of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful for people to understand. It's a philosophical perspective. And I wonder how different, if at all, they are from the leadership principles you espoused while you were at Gaia Herbs.
I think they're an evolution,
Hmm.
frankly. I was not thinking in a regenerative mindset then at Gaia. I was thinking, in terms of doing what I could to the very best that I could do it. But now I'm also employing the concept of doing what I do to the best I can do it, but do it regeneratively.
Hmm. Yeah. No, many herbalists consider, just on this theme of teachers, many herbalists consider plants to be their teachers. Are there particular herbs that you believe offer important lessons for us in this particular age of ecological crisis?
Mm. Wow, that's a packed question, and I think that it's an important one to really think about because what kind of how to what capacity can plants sequester carbon? What capacity can plants regenerate the soil food web? To what capacity can plants aggregate more nutrient density more quickly? So there's a lot of kind of power in that question, Corinna. And the answer isn't so simple, but it's quite complex, I think. And I would like to think that plants in every way, plants can be our allies, and but I think in far greater ways than we realized in the past.
Well, sometimes even asking the question will be the seed of thought, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've spoken of regeneration as both a personal and a planetary journey. Um, what do you think this word, regeneration, means to you on a more human level?
Well, it's interesting because I spent the last 2 years traveling to Europe to blue zones. And I've been looking at the lives of centenarians, doing a lot of filming, documentary kind of work. And the takeaways are what does it mean to live a life regenerative? Means that we must nourish, we must connect, and we must move. Those are the three tenets of health span and lifespan. And I think when you talk about how to build a life regenerative, it really correlates to our organ systems. If you want to take and talk about Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or just the anatomy of the body, you know, um, we need to nourish in a way that protects our nervous system and our brain, our vagus nerve system, and our overall you know um, autonomic nervous system. So that part of nourishment it correlates to in Chinese medicine to the upper jiao,
Mhm.
the upper jiao and the upper part of the body, and then the connect part of it that I relate to is so important to outwardly, externally, to make connections socially, responsible connections that are so important for a regenerative life. But internally, this is associated with both the middle jiao and the fascia in our body, that tissue which connects every cell in our body. And so connection, the concept of connection internally and externally is so important for health span and lifespan. And then the third part of it is the idea of movement. You can't have longevity or health span without staying active, without being in motion. We talked pre-show about your athleticism, and so this is associated in the Chinese medicine with the lower jiao, where the vital energies are stored in the kidney systems, and all that vitality has to keep. First of all, you have to protect and preserve it for a life regenerated, but you also have to be able to move it right to the right parts of the body. And so nourish, connect, move, internally and externally, are what regenerative life means to me. And the more you can enliven those qualities, the more I think you will contribute to your health span and lifespan.
Wow. Well, I've so enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours. And I'm sure we could talk about your perspective as a leader and teacher as it connects to concepts of sustainability and education. It's what I'm pursuing as my PhD at any rate.
Yeah.
And I think I may actually do my own episode just reflecting on this one and sharing some thoughts, because I think there are so many things that connect the philosophy of regeneration and leadership, the way that you see it, the way that I see it, and then also just the concepts of connection that are so, so important. There's
Yes.
really several threads to pick up there. Now, I'd love for you to have the opportunity to just share any closing thoughts. Perhaps there's a question that you wish I'd asked or something you've been thinking about through the course of this interview that you want to bring up. And, we could continue going for another 10 or 15 if you still had time.
Yeah, I have time, Corinna. The one thing I think we all need to, in our world of stress today, we all need to take time to recognize the opposites. Forces of life are essential to nurture. We're focused in a world of stress now, and we're trying to move through it, and it's pushing us to more and more, outward expression of activity just to kind of, mobilize here, there, and there to stay alive, and we're spending less and less time being still, and yet dynamism and stillness are the two opposite foundations of life, as we, of regenerative life. So if I were to leave anyone with any thought today, is to balance out the dynamism in your life with stillness, equal and opposite value of stillness, in order to stay, in a state of equilibrium. And then the second thing is take time to observe. Nature is a powerful teacher, and there's wisdom embedded in every moment, in every location in nature. Take time to get still and see it, get to know it, observe it, and be partnered with it, because that will nourish your life as well. And for me, personally, this journey with Kokora and all the products that Kokora has launched and is about to launch is about to give, a venue for these connections to take place. What I've spoken about. So how can we make these touch points using, some of these herbs? It just seems, a wonderful way to really enable the narrative to continue.
Well, I have to say, I appreciate how accessible you make this conversation. I feel like we've talked about a lot of very deep concepts, but at least made them something that my audience can understand and absorb, even if they're new to the subject of regenerative agriculture, regenerative organic, and these sorts of things. I actually conducted an interview recently of a friend to get a perspective on what they knew about regeneration. And I was surprised to know that they had no awareness of any certification on regenerative, like not at all. I said, well, what would you think it means as regard to food? I think you and I both really care about the meaning of words. At least that has come through, and you're sharing the original Latin for some of these concepts, which also seem to echo traditional Chinese perspectives in some cases as well. But the power of words, the power of a phrase, and meaning behind them, and even the meaning behind Kokora, which we didn't get into. I would love to know that before we depart. What is the meaning of Kokora?
So Kokora as a brand, I wanted to find a brand name that started with K, because there's something special about the resonance of the sound of K when you hear it, and how it resonates in the brain, and how it's easy to retain the name, and how it sets a vibration of joy and happiness in the body. And so this name that is Kokora is from the name Kokoro, from Japanese culture. And in Japan, Kokoro means the connection of spirit, heart, and mind. And, Kokora is just a little bit more of a feminine twist on Kokoro. And
Well, it goes up at the end. Is almost, even if it's not tonal, kind of leaves you with an uplifted sense.
Uplifted sense. And it just felt like the moment I thought, and I said to myself, Kokora, I thought, wow, this is it. This resonates, and it resonates really well. Its meaning with the life regenerated.
Well, I suspected there was something there. I'm glad you shared it.
Yeah.
At any rate, asking people what these words mean to them is one way to help you understand where the meaning of words is shifting with time, right?
Yeah.
And I think people are getting a better understanding of what it means to be organic, of what it means to be fair trade, of what it means to be regenerative, even if they aren't familiar with the certifications yet. So every bit that we can do to help broaden people's exposures to these terms, their understanding of what it means to live a life regenerated, to be able to integrate principles of truly sustainable living into their lifestyle, from the materials they might seek to build with when they, repair a home, to the foods that they buy and put in their bodies, to the supplements that they purchase. I mean, I did see, like, you are using plastic pouches. I also use plastic pouches and packaging for Orlo Nutrition, but we also make them with post-consumer recycled waste, and yours are made with 20 to 60% post-consumer recycled plastic, which is better than just about anything else out there. I mean, I think ours are close to 70%, but never at 70. And it's hard to do. I mean, the fact is, so much of the plastics that are out there are not recycled. And so if you get something into Second Life, at least you're reducing the amount of new plastics that are being used.
Yeah, one of the things we have to serve is the stability of like powders going into pouches like
Which
this.
is what we have to do on the soft gel side too, and powders. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I will tell you though, I started a company a long time ago called Earth Renewable Technologies, and we've cracked the nut for rigid packaging, and which means, bottles, and food containers, dietary supplement bottles. The technology, the patent is there, the technology is there, and the actual performance of the material is greater than plastic. The only drawback is the biodegradability comes through industrial composting, not home composting. And I don't know, Korean, maybe you can speak to this about what consumers value greater, something that is more compostable or something that is, plant-based. And because the material that we developed is 100% compostable in an industrial environment through an ASTM 6400 rating, but it won't compost necessarily in your backyard like your food waste or other waste might compost.
I mean, it might if you ground it up, maybe,
Huh?
if they had let's say a shredder, like a paper shredder that could manage it, maybe something like that. But
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. It's people can't be bothered with complicated answers to questions in a way, because we have so much information coming at us at a given time. I mean, even sometimes sorting recycling and compost gets to be too much for people. Like, I mean, we're pretty adamant at our house. And I was part of a coalition of people that pressured Santa Cruz County to start composting. I was thrilled when it finally happened, right? And so we do have industrial abilities now. Like, I can put that stuff in our compost bin and it's taken care of at an industrial site. But I also home compost. And all of my organic materials mostly go into my home composter. And then it's those materials that I can't do much with that go to the industrial side of things, or our yard trimmings and things like that.
I wonder if your listeners, consumers, would value like we're getting away from plastic entirely, plant-based, that excludes the whole microplastic, problem now, and as solution number one, and then try to address the composting as a secondary solution, or is composting the first problem they want to tackle?
I would think it's simpler to think plant-based first. I mean, there are plant solutions. You can even make plastics from algae, or things that act like plastic that are rigid like that from algae. There are now sneakers that are made from algae bloom. Like, there's this company that basically goes out and harvests the algae bloom, the out of control algae bloom, and then uses that bloom to make the foam that goes into certain sneakers. But it does mean that they are a friendlier waste product than would be your typical shoe.
Yeah, I know. When it comes to food material or supplements going in a bottle, though, you have to have the correct heat deformation performance. You have to have the correct, elasticity.
It has to be FDA cleared too.
Break point. You have to have FDA, allowance for food. So there's these performance criteria that's where it breaks down. And this is why, it's hard to get powder in a pouch that's plant-based and remains stable without absorbing moisture back through the material. But there is a solution there. And, I think for me, that's one of my objectives. When you talk about what does life regenerated mean to me, it's got to include these kinds of issues, and the plastics one is a big one for me.
I'm right there with you. And, things like an aluminum can, they're also coated in plastic. So, the people are doing demos on TikTok where they take a can of Coke and basically soak it in a solution. And then what dissolves is the aluminum can and what's left is a bag of Coca-Cola. And it's like, what? It kind of blows your mind. I never thought about it, right? I thought that BPA liner was only really in acidic foods. But of course, Coca-Cola is acidic. It can dissolve a tooth if you just put the tooth in a glass of a Coke, So it, of course, has to have a barrier. And this is one of the challenges is so many of the materials we use, even though aluminum is nearly infinitely recyclable, when they recycle it, they're burning up the plastic that's inside the can, right? Where does that go?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it goes into the environment in one way or another. It's not like they're somehow extracting it and doing something with it. It gets burned up, right?
We have to find a solution, real solution.
Exactly. So I think we need to continue thinking bigger about things from a materials perspective so that we can do things like bring people the berries that they want, not in a plastic clamshell anymore. I try to only buy berries when I go to the farmer's market. But you know what? My farmer's market isn't open from November to May. That's half the year.
Exactly.
What do? I'm not going to eat berries the rest of the year. I do get them from the frozen aisle, though. That's less packaging, so that's good. At any rate, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been my pleasure.
Yeah, it's truly a pleasure for me, Corinna. It's a pleasure to meet you and pleasure to, delve deep on some of these issues.
Well, I'll invite you back anytime.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you, listeners and watchers, for joining me today for this rich conversation with Ric Scalzo. I hope his journey from Gaia Herbs to Kokora Life has left you as inspired as I am to deepen your connection to Earth and to the regenerative power of plants. If you found value in this episode, I invite you to help us grow. Help us grow something beautiful, literally. For every new subscriber to this podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our newsletter on caremorebebetter.com, we are planting a tree through that partnership with Forest Planet. So go ahead, click that subscribe button wherever you listen or watch, and I'll continue planting those trees to help us build a greener planet. Together, we can regenerate more than just soil. We can regenerate hope, health, and a thriving future for all. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, when you care more, you can do better too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.